Ah, 1987. 1987. What a great year. Or at least, that's how I intended on starting this video. And then I started to do some research and a lot of shit went down in 1987. Terry Waite went missing in Lebanon and was then held hostage for the next 5 years. The British ferry, Herald of Free Enterprise, capsized while leaving harbour, killing 193. 31 people are injured by the IRA detonating a bomb in the British barracks in Germany. In retaliation, SAS kill 8 members of the Provisional IRA. 1 person a day dies of AIDS. I mean, what the fuck? And I mean, after checking out what was happening in the USA, I mean, that wasn't much better either. The USS Stark was hit by an Iraqi Exocet missile, killing 37 sailors. Northwest Airlines Flight 255 crashes on takeoff, killing all but one of 156 passengers on board. Ronald Simmons goes on a 6-day killing spree, killing 16 people, including his wife, children, and grandchildren. Andy Warhol dies and Zac Efron is born. And Microsoft hadn't even got as far as Windows 2.0. I'm never starting a video like this again. To be fair, it's no real surprise I didn't remember any of this. I was only 5 at the time, and Michael Jackson's Bad had just come out. And that wasn't the only piece of amazing being released that year. In October of 1987, Commodore released the Amiga 500, and it's hard to emphasise just how much of an impact that had on my formative years. Over the next 6 or 7 years, I was never far from an Amiga. Just to give you an idea of how important the Amiga was, out of my close circle of friends during primary school and secondary school, 4 of us had a Sega Mega Drive, 2 had a Super Nintendo, 1 had an original NES, and 6 of us had an Amiga of some sort. I mean, just let that sink in. That's 6 of us had Amigas, and I don't think our group is a particularly odd sample group. Growing up as a kid, whenever you were round at a strange aunt's or at your parents' next swingers shindig, if they wanted you out of the way, they'd usually send you off up to the family box room to play, and I quote, video games. It was always either a Spectrum or an Amiga. By God, did you hope it was an Amiga. It was a difference between this and this. The A500 had a 32-bit register with a 32-bit internal bus. It had 16-bit main ALU and a 16-bit external data bus, and a 24-bit address bus. Now I don't know what any of that means, but the result was that with a bit of clever trickery, the Amiga was able to get 4096 colours on the screen at the same time. I mean, the SNES could only manage a paltry 256. And you did hear me right back then. There was a lot of 32 bits going on. A couple of 16s and a 24, but like 32 bits. 32 bits in 1987. And we're not even talking about the Amiga 1200. That upped the total palette to 16.8 million colours, and it could display 262,000 colours on the screen at any one time. I mean, that beats the PS1 and the Sega Saturn, and they didn't come out for another 2 years. Now, you would have thought with all this futuristic horsepower, the A500 and the A1200 would be able to match anything that Sony and Sega could offer. But unfortunately, as Atari found out, sometimes the math doesn't just add up, and adding more bits doesn't necessarily get the results you were hoping for. The 500 could go toe-to-toe with the 16-bit machines. Whilst it was limited in some aspects, such as hardware-generated sprite rotation and scaling, a la Mode 7, it could make up for them with better 3D performance, technically. However, by the time the 1200 came out and the ill-fated Amiga CD32, Eyes were all over the new generation of consoles. Both the Saturn and the PS1 promised graphical powerhouses like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, Sega Rally and Ridge Racer, and very quickly the Amiga looked very last gen. I'm sure there are a myriad of technical reasons why the Amiga wasn't able to match up with the development that was going on in the console world. Rather than focus on what the Amiga could have achieved and where it fell short, I'd much rather focus on what it did achieve, and that was to become one of the most beloved computers of the 1990s. Since the dominance of the PC in home computing since the mid-90s and onwards, PCs have kind of lost their individuality. There hasn't been any real icons like the Spectrum, the BBC Micro, the Amiga, the Atari ST since the 1990s. And here, in the UK, the Amiga was king. I mean, you only have to look at Rob's reaction in my last retro vlog when I hinted at the fact that the SNES was just as powerful as the Amiga.
The Amiga was not a real powerhouse compared to the SNES that would match it, so it's effectively the same playing Wing Commander with a controller.
Them fighting words where I come from.
Yeah.
There's some real love out there for this machine, right to this day. I'm not the only one. So I've waxed lyrical about this janky old computer for long enough, without getting down to the root reason why everybody loved it: the games. There certainly was a wealth of great talent creating games for this monster, the likes of LucasArts, Bullfrog, Psygnosis, Sensible Software, Cinemaware, Mindscape, Team 17, the Bitmap Brothers, the list goes on. Many of the games featured on the Amiga made their appearances on other platforms, but their spiritual home is always on a disc with a handwritten label. Speaking of handwritten labels, you can't talk about the Amiga without addressing the elephant in the room. Arr, pirates! Piracy on the Amiga was an epidemic. Now, I don't condone piracy, and I honestly think that the piracy problem was one of the reasons why a lot of major developers gave the platform a wide berth, but you have to acknowledge that the availability of extensively free games was one of the key reasons why the A500 was so popular among kids. If you had a Super Nintendo and you wanted to play SimCity, it would cost you around 35 of our old English pounds. For the Amiga, it would cost you less than a £1 disc, and having to pretend that you believed that kid in school that was always talking shit all the time. No, Nathan, no, I didn't know your uncle's part of the SAS. Oh, really? He was part of the Iranian embassy siege, was he? Wow. No way. Well, no, I'm sure most members of the SAS, when they retire, end up valeting cars out on the industrial estate. Yeah, no, that's fine. Hey, do you have SimCity? And that was that. The next night, you had your own copy of SimCity. The grand irony of this is during the making of this video, I had to work really hard to get an Amiga emulator to work so I could capture game footage. And the main thing that was preventing me was the Kickstart anti-piracy ROMs that were built into the Amiga itself. Without further ado, let's talk about some of the games I love the best. Syndicate was my first real introduction into the cyberpunk genre, and what an introduction. The opening cutscene depicts a poor geezer getting grabbed off the street, taken back to an evil corporation's headquarters, and being biomechanically augmented to become an assassin for the corporation.
I never asked for this.
Released by Bullfrog in 1993, back before Peter Molyneux became the punchline for many a joke, Syndicate had you taking control of an evil mega-corporation that had no qualms about assassinating competition, kidnapping people and converting them into agents, stealing technologies from other companies, and, well, assassinating a government minister during a parade. Not to put too fine a point on it, this is the game that at the tender age of 10 taught me just how effective suicide bombers can be. I mean, what the fuck do 10-year-olds have now? Fucking Splatoon, Amiibos and Minecraft? I was a commander of a highly armed, highly augmented, morally corrupt militia of super soldiers that went around the globe offing police chiefs and government officials. And that was okay. God bless the 90s. Not your thing? Okay, how about Cinemaware's 1989 classic It Came From the Desert? You play as Dr. Greg Bradley, a geologist who comes to a sleepy desert town in Nevada to investigate the site of a meteor crash just outside of town. Little do you know that the radiation from the meteorite has mutated all the local ants to the size of large trucks, and now they're running amok! This game is a masterpiece. You go around the town talking to locals and following clues, trying to stop the ant infestation from spreading, and just generally getting yourself into trouble. Mechanically, it's all had together with a bunch of mini games. 1 minute, you're trying to put out a fire in your cabin, and then the next, you're trying to escape from hospital because you've got an ant invasion to stop. Then you might be in a knife fight, or shooting giant ants, or running away from them and throwing grenades as you go. What more could you ask for? No? Still not your thing? Okay, how about the game that's been described as Dark Souls for the 90s? Moonstone is one of the best examples of a developer building a game from the ground up with a specific machine's limitations in mind. Released by Mindscape in 1991, Moonstone is an epic fantasy quest about collecting keys that you have to trade for a moonstone to unlock Stonehenge so you can go fight this will-o'-the-wisp ghost kind of thing. Now that's what I call narrative. Believe it or not, the most notable thing about this game is not the strong and complex characters who have a deep and timeless story arc that we can all relate to in one way or another, or the magical world that feels like a real place that exists when you're not there, where you're just a small part of a much, much grander mythos. No. Moonstone is remembered for the blood. And oh boy, was there a lot of blood. Now bear in mind, I was 9 when I first played this game. At that point, Mortal Kombat was the goriest game that I'd ever seen, and that was nothing compared to this, and that wouldn't get released for the Mega Drive for another year. Oh, and you got to fight a dragon too! But the thing that really stood out about this game were the controls. Considering it was a single button joystick, there was quite a moveset, all of which could be easily pulled off. Okay, so you're not into cyberpunk or fantasy adventuring, and you have a deep-seated fear of either giant ants and or geologists. Okay, SuperCars 2 is really good. Released in 1991 by Magnetic Fields, SuperCars 2 is one of those games that once you get into it, it's very easy to find out that you've lost a not inconsiderable amount of time to it. The premise is as basic as they come. You race cars around a track from a top-down perspective, you earn money by winning races, you buy upgrades like more armour, more missiles, and more engines? And then you use said upgrades to win more races, to get more money, to buy more upgrades, to win more races. Pretty simple, but so much fun. And that's one of the most memorable things about the good games that were on the Amiga. It's the sense of fun. Whether you're using a brainwashing device in Syndicate called the Persuadertron, having a mini game where you're trying to escape a hospital and it came from the desert, or the amount of unnecessary blood in Moonstone, the fun developers were having with their games is palpable, and SuperCars is no different. In between races, you'll often have little interview sections. Sometimes it's to get your driver's license renewed, sometimes it's an interview with an environmentalist magazine, and sometimes it's just with the cops. But some of the dialogue is amazing. And these are just 4 of my favourites. I haven't even scratched the surface. I haven't even talked about Monkey Island, Simon the Sorcerer, Lemmings, Another World, Turrican 2, Rainbow Island, James Bond 2, Alien Breed, Frontier Elite 2, Wing Commander, Civilization. The list goes on. The Amiga really was a special machine, and this year it turns 30. It was released in the Netherlands in April of 1987, and in May the rest of Europe got it. And in October, the UK and the US got their release. I couldn't find the exact date on Wikipedia, but on the 1st of October this year, I will be getting drunk and playing Moonstone. To play us out, I have one of my favourite pieces of music from the Amiga, and that is the theme tune for the Formula 1 Grand Prix. Now I actually know the guy that made this. His name's Dave Lowe, and he's attributed with making lots of music for the Amiga and one track for the Sega Mega Drive. He's always listed under the name Uncle Art, so have a look in the credits for some of your favourite Amiga games, and he may very well be in there. On a trivial side note, you know the Atari Jaguar game Cybermorph? And it has this really annoying green floating head, which always berates you and says,
"Where did you learn to fly?"
That was his wife. So finally, to play us out, here is Formula 1 GP for the Amiga. Thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, guys. If you enjoyed the content, hit the subscribe button down below. I upload videos like this once every 4 weeks, and on the other 3 weeks, every Sunday I upload a devlog for a game that I'm making, and on every Wednesday I just do a general jibber jabber video where I talk about what's going on in the gaming world, sometimes little bits of retro collecting and all sorts. So if you enjoyed the video, share it around, subscribe, like, comment, and let's get a discussion going. What was your favourite Amiga game back in the day? Alright, take it easy guys, and I shall see you next time. Cheerio now, bye bye.